Emma Carter rushed through the luxury hotel lobby, balancing a tray of steaming coffee for London's most important business meeting. One stumble sent scalding coffee cascading down the pristine white suit of billionaire CEO James Blackwood. The ballroom fell silent. His steel-gray eyes locked onto hers, and instead of fury, something darker flickered there. What she did next shocked everyone. Before we begin, write in the comments what city you're watching from, and at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy watching. The Savoy Hotel's crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Emma Carter weaved through the crowd of London's most powerful business leaders. Her black uniform was crisp, her name badge perfectly straight, but her hands trembled slightly as she balanced the silver tray loaded with bone china coffee cups. "Table 12 needs their order," her supervisor had barked 15 minutes ago. "The Blackwood Industries Summit. Don't mess this up, Emma. These people could buy our entire catering company with their pocket change." Emma had nodded, picked up the tray, and headed toward the grand ballroom where 200 of Britain's wealthiest executives were gathered for the most exclusive business event of the year. She'd worked dozens of high-end events, but nothing quite like this. The ballroom doors were twice her height, polished mahogany that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Emma pushed through carefully, immediately overwhelmed by the scale of wealth surrounding her. Men in handmade suits discussed million-pound deals over crystal glasses of champagne. Women dripped in diamonds that caught the light like tiny stars. And then she saw him. James Blackwood stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the room as he spoke quietly into his mobile phone. Even from across the ballroom, Emma could tell this was a man who commanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it. His white dress shirt was perfectly pressed, his black suit clearly bespoke. Emma had seen his photograph in the Financial Times countless times, but in person, James Blackwood was magnetic in a way that made her stomach flutter. She forced herself to look away and focus on her job. "Excuse me, miss," a woman in emerald silk touched Emma's arm. "Could you bring the coffee to table 12? Mr. Blackwood has been waiting." Emma's heart skipped. Table 12? James Blackwood's table. She made her way across the ballroom, dodging conversations about stock prices and mergers. The closer she got to table 12, the more nervous she became. James Blackwood's reputation preceded him. Ruthless businessman, self-made billionaire, a man who destroyed companies before breakfast and bought countries before lunch. Emma was 3 steps from his table when disaster struck. A waiter carrying champagne glasses moved directly into her path. Emma tried to step sideways to avoid him, but her heel caught on the edge of a Persian rug. Time slowed to a crawl as she felt herself falling forward, the tray of coffee flying from her hands. The bone china cups spun through the air in perfect, terrible slow motion. Coffee arced across the ballroom like liquid amber, catching the chandelier light as it fell. And then James Blackwood chose that exact moment to turn around. The scalding coffee hit him square in the chest, soaking through his pristine white shirt and expensive suit jacket. Steam rose from the fabric as the dark liquid spread across his torso. Emma crashed to her knees on the marble floor, surrounded by shattered china and the ruins of her career. The ballroom fell completely silent. 200 conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the string quartet in the corner seemed to pause between notes. Every eye in the room turned to stare at the catastrophe unfolding near the windows. Emma looked up from the floor, her face burning with shame, and found herself staring directly into the steel-gray eyes of James Blackwood. She expected rage. She expected him to explode with the kind of fury that powerful men were famous for. She expected security guards and lawsuits and the complete destruction of everything she'd worked for. Instead, James Blackwood smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found something interesting, something he wanted to play with before he destroyed it. Camera flashes began exploding around them as society photographers pushed closer, their lenses focused on the collision that would be front-page news by morning. I could hear whispers starting to spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Did you see that? Who is she? James Blackwood looks furious. Someone's getting fired tonight." Emma scrambled to gather the broken china, her hands shaking so badly she could barely pick up the pieces. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing murmur of the crowd. James's security team materialized from the crowd, 3 men in dark suits who moved with military precision. The closest one stepped forward, his hand already reaching for Emma's arm to escort her out. But James raised his hand, stopping them without taking his eyes off Emma's face. "It's fine, Marcus." His voice was deep and smooth, with the kind of upper-class accent that spoke of private schools and old money. "Just a little accident." The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama. I could hear their stares like physical weight as Emma knelt on the marble floor, still trying to clean up the mess she had made. "Leave it," James commanded quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. Emma looked up at him, confused. He extended his hand toward her, and she realized he was offering to help her stand. She took his hand without thinking, and electricity shot up her arm at the contact. His palm was warm and surprisingly calloused, not the soft hands of a man who'd never worked a day in his life. James pulled her to her feet, and suddenly they were standing much closer than was proper. Emma could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her head spin. She could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could count the dark lashes that framed them. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what London's most ruthless businessman would do to the clumsy waitress who had ruined his shirt. James leaned closer, so close that his breath stirred the hair by her ear. The cameras couldn't capture what he was about to say, but Emma would remember his words for the rest of her life. "Work for me." Emma's heart stopped. She pulled back to stare at him, sure she'd misheard. But his gray eyes were serious, almost predatory in their intensity. "What?" she breathed. "You heard me." His voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for her ears. "I have a proposition for you, Emma Carter." The way he said her name sent shivers down her spine. He'd been watching her, learning about her, planning this moment. Emma looked around at the sea of faces staring at them. Photographers pushed closer, their cameras capturing every moment of her humiliation. Society ladies whispered behind jeweled hands while their husbands calculated the cost of the coffee she had spilled. This was insane. Men like James Blackwood didn't offer jobs to women like her, not in front of 500 witnesses, not with cameras flashing and society pages watching. But as Emma looked into his steel gray eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Something that looked almost like vulnerability beneath the predatory confidence. Emma started, then stopped. What could she say? That she was terrified? That she didn't belong in his world? That accepting his offer felt like stepping off a cliff into an abyss she couldn't see the bottom of? James was still holding her hand. His thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture so intimate that the crowd gasped. "What do you say, Emma?"
Emma stared into James's steel-gray eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. The entire ballroom waited for her answer, cameras flashing like lightning around them. "Yes," she whispered. The single word cut through the silence like a blade. The crowd gasped. Camera flashes exploded around them like a storm of light. James's smile widened, and for just a moment, Emma saw something almost human flicker in his predatory gaze. "Excellent." He released her hand and straightened his coffee-stained shirt. "Marcus will bring the car around." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'll have to cut my evening short. As you can see, I've had a bit of an accident." Polite laughter rippled through the room, but Emma could hear the tension underneath it. Everyone was still staring. Everyone was still watching. James placed his hand on the small of Emma's back, and she nearly jumped at the contact. Even through the fabric of her uniform, her touch burned. "Shall we?" he murmured in her ear. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Her legs felt like water as James guided her through the crowd toward the ballroom's exit. People stepped aside to let them pass, their whispers following like a wake behind a ship. 24 hours later, Emma stood on the pavement outside Blackwood Industries, staring up at the glass tower that seemed to pierce the London sky like a gleaming knife. The building was all curves and angles, modern architecture that screamed wealth and power. 50 floors of steel and glass stretched above her, each window reflecting the morning sun like 1,000 eyes. Emma had counted them twice, stopping at 30 because the numbers made her dizzy. Her mobile buzzed with a text from James. "Penthouse level. Tell reception you're expected." Emma pushed through the revolving doors into a lobby that took her breath away. Everything was marble and gold and soft lighting that made the whole space feel like a temple. Her reflection multiplied in the polished surfaces around her. A small, ordinary woman in a simple black dress, completely out of place in this world of wealth and power. "Miss Carter?" The receptionist's smile was perfectly professional. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Top floor." The elevator was a work of art. Mirrors and soft leather that made Emma feel like she was ascending to heaven. She watched the numbers climb as they rose through the building. 10 floors, 20, 30. Finally, the elevator stopped at 50, and the doors opened directly into James's office. Emma stepped out and immediately understood why people said money could buy anything. The space was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of London that made her feel like she was floating over the world. The Thames curved like a silver ribbon through the city, and Emma could see all the way to the London Eye. "Impressive, isn't it?" James's voice came from behind her. Emma turned to find him watching her reaction, dressed in a fresh white shirt and black suit that fit him perfectly. In the morning light streaming through those massive windows, he looked even more imposing than he had at the hotel. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed. "Welcome to Blackwood Industries," James said, moving to stand beside her at the windows. "This is where empires are built and fortunes are made." He began the tour immediately, leading her through corridors lined with modern art that probably cost more than most people's houses. Every surface was polished to perfection, every detail carefully chosen to project success and power. But Emma noticed something else as they walked through the offices. The employees they passed didn't just respect James, they feared him. Conversations stopped when he appeared. People pressed themselves against the walls to let him pass. No one made eye contact. "Mr. Blackwood," a nervous-looking man in glasses, approached them. "The Morrison account needs your approval." "Not now, Stevens," he cut him off without slowing down. "Schedule it for Thursday." "But, sir, they're threatening to pull their investment if—" "Stevens?" James stopped walking and turned to face Stevens. He didn't say a word, but something in his expression made the man pale. "Thursday," James repeated quietly. Stevens nodded quickly and hurried away, practically running down the corridor. Emma watched the exchange with growing unease. This was the man she'd agreed to work for? This cold, intimidating figure who made grown men cower? "Your office?" James said, opening a door to reveal a space larger than Emma's entire flat. The desk was made of glass and steel, the chair looked like it belonged in a spaceship, and the view of London was spectacular. "This is mine?" Emma asked, unable to hide her amazement.
"You're my personal assistant now. You'll need somewhere suitable to work." James moved to his own office next door, settling behind a desk that looked like it could run a small country. Emma followed, still trying to process the magnitude of what was happening to her life. "Your first task," James said, pulling out a leather-bound planner, "is to organize my schedule. It has become rather chaotic lately." Emma took the planner and opened it, her eyes widening as she scanned the pages. Every day was packed from 6 in the morning until midnight. Meeting after meeting, call after call, with no breaks for meals or rest. "You work 18 hours a day," Emma said, looking up at him in concern. "Sometimes more," James replied matter-of-factly. "Success requires sacrifice." Emma flipped through more pages, looking for something, anything that suggested James had a personal life. No dinner dates, no social events, no family gatherings, just endless work. "Don't you have friends?" Emma asked, without thinking. James's expression hardened. "Friends are a luxury I can't afford." Emma wanted to ask more, but something in his tone warned her off. Instead, she focused on the schedule, trying to make sense of the abbreviated notes and meeting codes. While James took a phone call, Emma opened the desk drawers looking for a pen. The first drawer contained expensive pens and business cards. The second held legal documents and contracts. The third drawer stuck slightly, and when Emma finally got it open, she found something that made her breath catch. Hidden beneath a stack of financial reports were 3 photographs. The pictures showed James with a young girl who couldn't be more than 10 years old. In one photo, they were at a park, the girl laughing as James pushed her on a swing. In another, they were building a sandcastle on a beach, both of them grinning at the camera. But the third photo that broke Emma's heart. It showed the same little girl in a hospital bed, connected to machines, her small hand holding James's as he sat beside her. "What are you doing?" James's voice was ice-cold, deadly quiet. Emma looked up to find him standing over her, his gray eyes blazing with fury. I was just looking for a pen," Emma stammered, quickly closing the drawer. "Never," James said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Touch my personal things." Emma nodded quickly, her heart racing. But as James turned away, she caught something in his expression that made her chest ache. Beneath the anger, beneath the cold businessman facade, she saw pain, raw, devastating pain that he was trying desperately to hide. The ruthless billionaire who terrified his employees, who worked 18 hours a day with no friends or family, was hiding something heartbreaking. And Emma realized that everything she thought she knew about James Blackwood was about to change.
3 days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and carefully organized schedules. Emma threw herself into her work, trying to forget the pain she'd seen in James's eyes when she'd accidentally discovered those photographs. Every time she looked at him across the office, she saw the walls he'd built around himself, the careful distance he maintained from everyone, including her. James had been polite but cold since the drawer incident, professional, distant, as if that moment of vulnerability had never happened. On Thursday evening, Emma was packing up her desk when James appeared in her office doorway. The late afternoon sun streaming through the windows cast his tall frame in silhouette, making him look even more imposing than usual. "I need you to work late tonight," he said without preamble. "There are contracts that need reviewing before tomorrow's meeting." Emma looked at the stack of documents he was holding. "Of course. I can stay as long as needed." "Good. We'll work from my penthouse. It's quieter there." Emma's pulse quickened. In the 3 days she'd been working for him, James had never invited her to his personal space.
The penthouse was legendary among London's elite, a private sanctuary that few people had ever seen. "Is that appropriate?" Emma asked, immediately regretting how prim she sounded. James's gray eyes flashed with something that might have been amusement. "Miss Carter, I assure you, my intentions are purely professional." But as they rode the private elevator from the office level to his penthouse, Emma wasn't entirely convinced that there was something different about James tonight. A tension in his shoulders, a restlessness in the way he moved that suggested this was more than just work. The elevator doors opened directly into his home, and Emma stepped into a space that took her breath away. If she'd thought his office was impressive, the penthouse was otherworldly. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 sides of the apartment, offering a panoramic view of London that made her feel like she was floating in the clouds. The Thames snaked through the city below, its dark waters reflecting the lights of bridges and buildings. In the distance, she could see the London Eye turning slowly against the evening sky. "This is incredible," Emma breathed, moving toward the windows. "I bought it for the view," James said, setting the contracts on a glass dining table. "Sometimes I need to remind myself how far I've come." The apartment was decorated in shades of black, white, and steel gray, sophisticated, masculine, but somehow lonely. Emma noticed there were no personal touches, no photographs or mementos. It was beautiful, but cold, like a luxury hotel suite. "Are you hungry?" James asked, loosening his tie. "I could order something from—" "Don't do that," Emma interrupted. "I can work without eating." James stopped moving, his hands still on his tie. "When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Emma thought about it and realized she couldn't remember. Since starting this job, she'd been surviving on coffee and whatever snacks she could grab between meetings. "I'll cook," James said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "You cook?" Emma stared at him. "Shocking, I know. Billionaires aren't supposed to know their way around a kitchen." He led her to a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine, all granite countertops and professional-grade appliances. But as Emma watched James move around the space, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator with practiced ease, she realized this wasn't for show. He really did cook. "Pasta okay?" James asked, filling a pot with water. "It's about the only thing I make well." "That sounds perfect." Emma perched on a bar stool at the kitchen island, fascinated by this glimpse into James's private life. He'd shed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms that spoke of more than just gym workouts. "I learned to cook when I was 12, James said, heating olive oil in a pan. "My mom worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, so someone had to make sure my sister and I didn't starve." Emma's breath caught. This was the first personal information James had shared with her. "You grew up in London?" "East London, council housing in Hackney." James's voice was matter-of-fact, but Emma could hear the pride underneath. "We had nothing, but Mum made sure we knew we could be anything we wanted to be." "What happened to your father?" James's jaw tightened as he added garlic to the pan. "He left when Sophie was born, said he couldn't handle another mouth to feed." Emma felt her heart clench. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. We were better off without him." James stirred the pasta, his movements sharp with old anger. "Mum raised us to believe that hard work could overcome anything, that if you wanted something badly enough, you could make it happen." The kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and herbs as James prepared what looked like a simple but elegant pasta dish. Emma watched his hands as he worked. Strong, capable hands that could sign billion-pound deals, but also knew how to create something nurturing. "Is that what drove you to build all this?" Emma gestured toward the windows and the empire beyond them. James was quiet for a long moment, his attention focused on the food. Partly, but mostly, it was Sophie. Emma's pulse quickened. This was it, the opening she'd been waiting for. The girl in the photographs. James went very still. For a moment, Emma thought he was going to shut down again, retreat behind those walls he'd built around himself. Instead, he turned off the heat under the pan and faced her directly. "My sister, Sophie," he said quietly. "She's 23 now, though she'll always be 18 in my mind." What happened to her? James poured wine into 2 glasses, his hand steady despite the emotion Emma could see building in his eyes. Car accident, 5 years ago. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car head-on. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, James." "She's been in a coma ever since." James's voice was carefully controlled, but Emma could hear the pain underneath. "The doctors say there's still brain activity, that she might wake someday, but it's been 5 years and she's shown no signs of improvement." Emma slipped off the bar stool and moved closer to him. "I'm so sorry. The care she needs costs £15,000 a month. Private specialists, experimental treatments, the best facility money can buy." James stared out at the London skyline, his gray eyes distant. The NHS did what they could, but Sophie needed more. She needed everything. Understanding dawned on Emma like a cold wave. "That's why you became so ruthless in business." James nodded, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "Every company I acquired, every deal I made, every family business I destroyed, it was all for Sophie. I told myself that if I could just make enough money, I could save her." Emma reached out without thinking, her fingers touching James's cheek. He flinched at the contact, but didn't pull away. "You're not a monster. You're a brother who loves his sister." James's composure finally cracked. Emma saw the tears he'd been holding back for 5 years fill his gray eyes. "But what if it's not enough? What if all the money in the world can't bring her back? What if I destroyed all those lives for nothing?" Emma stepped closer, her hand still on his face. "Then you did it for love, and love is never nothing." James stared down at her, and Emma saw the exact moment when his carefully constructed walls finally crumbled. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. "Emma," he breathed. She rose up on her tiptoes as he leaned down, and their lips met in a kiss that tasted of tears and hope and 5 years of buried pain. Outside the windows, London sparkled like a constellation of fallen stars, but Emma was only aware of James's arms around her and the way her heart finally felt like it had found its home.
The next morning, Emma walked into Blackwood Industries with her heart still racing from the memory of James's kiss. She could still feel the warmth of his hands on her face, still taste the sweetness of that moment when his walls had finally come down. Everything had changed between them in his penthouse kitchen. The way he'd looked at her, held her, whispered her name against her lips. It was real. More real than anything Emma had ever experienced. She smoothed down her black dress and took the elevator to the top floor, hoping to catch James before his first meeting. They hadn't talked about what the kiss meant, but Emma could see it in his eyes when he'd walked her to the elevator last night. This wasn't just attraction. This was something deeper. The elevator doors opened to reveal James's office empty. His desk chair turned toward the windows. Emma checked her watch. 7:30 in the morning. James was always here by 7. "Mr. Blackwood?" Emma called out, stepping into the office. No response. Emma moved toward his desk to check his schedule when she heard voices coming from the conference room. James's voice,
low and tense, mixing with another voice that made Emma's blood run cold. A woman's voice, posh, educated, and furious. "You can't be serious, James. After everything we built together, you're throwing it all away for what? Some little office girl who spilled coffee on you?" Emma froze beside James's desk. The woman's voice carried through the conference room's glass walls with crystal clarity. "Victoria, you need to leave." James's voice was controlled, but Emma could hear the strain underneath. "I'm not leaving until you explain to me why you've lost your mind." Emma crept closer to the conference room, staying out of sight behind a marble pillar. Through the glass, she could see James standing with his back to the door, facing a woman that took Emma's breath away. Victoria Sterling was stunning in the way that only money could buy. Tall, blonde, with the kind of perfect features that graced magazine covers. She wore a designer suit that probably cost more than Emma made in 6 months, and diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists. This was the kind of woman that belonged in James's world. This was the kind of woman Emma could never compete with. "The newspapers are calling her your mystery woman. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me, for my family?" "We broke up 2 years ago," James said coldly. "Who I see now is none of your concern." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Broke up? James, darling, we didn't break up. I took a break. There's a difference." Emma's heart sank. A break. Not a break up. "You left," James said, his voice sharp with old pain. "You left when you were obsessed," Victoria's composure cracked, revealing the fury underneath. "Sophie, Sophie, Sophie. It was all you could talk about. Every conversation, every dinner, every moment we spent together. You weren't living, James. You were just existing, pouring every penny into keeping a ghost alive." Emma saw James's shoulders tense, his hands clench into fists at his sides. "She's not a ghost. She's my sister. She's been in a coma for 5 years. 5 years, James. At what point do you accept that she's not coming back?" "Never." The single word was spoken with such finality that Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Victoria was quiet for a moment, studying James with calculating eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more persuasive. "I know you still love her, Sophie, I mean. But James, you can't sacrifice your entire life for someone who will never know the difference." "Get out," James said quietly. "What about us? What about what we had together?" James finally turned to face her, and Emma could see his profile through the glass. His expression was stone cold, but she could see the pain in his gray eyes. "What we had was a business arrangement, Victoria. 2 wealthy families combining their empires. There was never any love between us, Victoria." Victoria's perfect facade slipped for just a moment, revealing something that looked almost like genuine hurt. "That's not true. We were good together, James. We understood each other." "You understood my bank account." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. "Fine, you want to play it that way?" She opened her designer handbag and pulled out a thick folder. "Sterling Industries is prepared to offer you a merger worth £500 million. Emma's breath caught. £500 million. The pharmaceutical division alone would triple your profit margins. And that's just the beginning. Combined, our companies would control 60% of the European market. James moved closer to the table, his attention caught despite himself. Emma could see him scanning the documents, his business mind automatically calculating the possibilities. "There's just one condition," Victoria said,
her voice dropping to a purr. "Which is—" Victoria stepped closer to James, close enough that Emma could see her hand trail along his arm. "Marry me. A proper merger, James. Our families, our companies, our futures." Emma felt the world tilt around her. 500 million pounds. More than enough to pay for Sophie's care for the rest of her life. More than enough to fund experimental treatments, to hire the best doctors in the world. "Think about it," Victoria whispered, her lips almost touching James's ear. "No more struggling to pay medical bills. No more choosing between business ethics and Sophie's care. You could save her and still be the man you used to be." Emma watched James's face, saw the moment when temptation flickered in his gray eyes. He was considering it. Actually considering Victoria's offer. Of course he was. How could he not? This was everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed for. His sister's life handed to him on a silver platter. All he had to do was marry a woman he didn't love and forget about the feelings he'd shared with Emma in his penthouse kitchen. Emma backed away from the conference room, her heart breaking with every step. She couldn't compete with 500 million pounds. She couldn't compete with Victoria's history with James, her beauty, her wealth, her ability to solve all his problems with a signature on a contract. Emma was just a girl who spilled coffee, a temporary distraction in James's complicated life. She grabbed her handbag from her desk and walked quickly toward the elevator, tears blurring her vision. Behind her, she could hear Victoria's voice rising with excitement as she outlined the merger details. "James, this could change everything. We could have the life we always planned, and Sophie would get the best care money can buy." The elevator doors closed just as Emma heard James's voice, quiet but audible. "I need time to think about it." As the elevator descended through the 50 floors of James's empire, Emma realized that time was exactly what Victoria would give him. Time to remember what they once had together. Time to calculate the benefits of marrying someone from his own world. Time to forget about the ordinary girl who'd briefly made him feel human again. By the time Emma reached the lobby, she knew she was walking out of James Blackwood's life forever.
Emma climbed the 3 flights of stairs to a tiny flat in Camden, her legs heavy with exhaustion and heartbreak. The narrow hallway smelled like curry and cleaning products, a stark contrast to the luxury she'd just left behind. She fumbled with the keys, hands shaking as she tried to process what she'd witnessed. Victoria's offer echoed in her mind. 500 million pounds. A merger that would solve all of James's problems. All he had to do was marry his ex-fiancée and forget about the girl who spilled coffee on his suit. Emma pushed open her door and stepped into her flat, all 400 square feet of it. The sitting room, kitchen, and bedroom were essentially one space, with a bathroom so small she had to stand sideways to close the door. After James's penthouse, it felt like a shoebox, but it was hers, and it was real. Emma sank onto a second-hand sofa, still wearing the black dress she'd chosen so carefully that morning. Everything felt different now. The kiss they'd shared, the vulnerability he'd shown her, it all seemed like a dream that had shattered against the cold reality of Victoria's business proposal. A knock at a door made Emma's heart jump. A landlord probably, or maybe a neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, complaining about something. "Emma," James's voice called through the thin wood. "I know you're in there. Please open the door." Emma froze. How had he found her address? Of course, he was James Blackwood. He could find anything. "Go away," Emma called back, not moving from the sofa. "I'm not leaving until we talk." Emma heard the determination in his voice and knew he meant it. She could picture him standing in a grotty hallway in his expensive suit, completely out of place, but stubborn as always. She opened the door, and James's eyes immediately took in everything.
The peeling wallpaper, the narrow corridor, the smell of other people's cooking. He looked like a prince who'd wandered into a council estate. "How did you find me?" Emma asked. "Your employment file." James stepped inside without invitation, his tall frame making the tiny space feel even smaller. "Emma, we need to talk about this morning." "There's nothing to talk about." Emma closed the door and leaned against it. "Victoria made you an offer you can't refuse. 500 million pounds and a beautiful wife who actually belongs in your world." James turned to face her, his gray eyes intense. "Is that what you think? That I'd marry someone for money? Wouldn't you? For Sophie? For 500 million pounds that could save her life?" James was quiet for a moment, and Emma saw the truth in his silence. He had been tempted. Of course he had. "Emma, it's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Emma moved away from the door, putting distance between them. "You have a chance to save your sister and marry someone who understands your world, someone who won't embarrass you at business dinners or spill things on important people." James looked around the flat again, taking in the stack of bills on Emma's tiny kitchen table, the photos of a family stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, the university textbooks piled in the corner. "Whose books are those?" James asked. Emma followed his gaze. "My brother Tom's. He's studying medicine at King's College." "You're paying for his education?" It wasn't a question. James had already spotted the university invoices among the bills. "That someone has to," Emma said defensively. "Tom's brilliant. He's going to be a doctor and help people. I won't let money stop him from achieving his dreams." James picked up one of the photos from the refrigerator. Emma with a man in his 50s who had kind eyes and a tired smile. "Your father?" "Dad's been sick for 2 years. Lung disease from working in the factories his whole life." Emma's voice was steady, but James could see the pain in her eyes. "The NHS does what it can, but private treatment costs money we don't have." Understanding dawned on James's face. "You've been supporting your whole family." "That's what families do," Emma said simply. "We take care of each other." Before James could respond, the door burst open and Emma's father walked in, carrying a bag of shopping. He stopped short when he saw James, his eyes widening with recognition. "Bloody hell," Dad said, setting down his groceries. "You're that billionaire bloke from the newspapers, the one our Emma spilled coffee on." "Dad," Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Frank Carter," her father said, extending a work-roughened hand to James. "Though I expect you already know that, seeing as how you're standing in my daughter's flat." James shook Frank's hand, noting the calluses and the strength in the older man's grip. "James Blackwood, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Carter." "Is it now?" Frank's eyes were shrewd as he studied James. "What brings a man like you to Camden? Bit off your usual patch, isn't it?" "Dad, please," Emma said, mortified. But James seemed genuinely interested in her father's direct manner. "I wanted to talk to Emma about something that happened at work." "I bet you did." Frank settled into his armchair, clearly not planning to leave him alone. "Our Emma's a good girl, Mr. Blackwood. Works 3 jobs to keep this family afloat. Never complains, never asks for anything for herself." "I can see that," James said quietly, his eyes finding Emma's. "But you need to understand something. Men like you don't marry girls like Emma. You might fancy a bit of fun, might enjoy having someone pretty and grateful hanging about, but when comes time to settle down, you'll marry someone from your own world." "Dad," Emma gasped, her face flaming. "I'm just speaking truth, love." Frank's voice was gentle but firm. "This gentleman here will marry some posh girl with a title and a trust fund. That's how the world works." James opened his mouth to protest, but another knock at the door interrupted him. Emma frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone else. "Emma, you in there?" A familiar voice called through the door. Emma's heart sunk. "Oh, no." "Who's that?" James asked. Emma reluctantly opened the door to reveal Danny Murphy, her ex-boyfriend from school. He was handsome in a rough-around-the-edges way, wearing jeans and a football shirt, his dark hair still damp from the rain. "Danny," Emma said weakly, "what are you doing here?" "Came to see if you were all right," Danny said, stepping inside. "Saw you on the news with this posh bloke, and I thought—" He stopped short when he saw James standing in Emma's tiny sitting room. "You must be the coffee spiller," Danny said, his tone immediately hostile. "Danny, don't," Emma warned him. But Danny was already moving closer to James, his shoulders squared for a fight. "What are you doing in Emma's flat? Come to slum it with the working class?" "Danny, stop it," Emma said, stepping between them. James remained calm, but Emma could see the tension in his jaw. "I came to speak to Emma about a personal matter." "Personal matter?" Danny laughed harshly. "What could you possibly have to say to her that's personal? You're from different worlds, mate." Emma saw James's expression tighten at Danny's words, the same words her father had just spoken. "Danny, please," Emma said, touching his arm. "Don't make this worse." Danny's expression softened when he looked at her. "Em, I've been thinking about what you said when we broke up, about needing to focus on your family, on taking care of everyone. But maybe it's time you let someone take care of you for a change." Emma's breath caught. Danny was looking at her with such tenderness, such genuine love that it made her chest ache. "Come back to me," Danny said softly. "We can get married, get a proper flat together. I've been promoted at the construction company. I can help with your dad's medical bills, your brother's university fees. We can be happy, Em, really happy." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Danny was offering her exactly what she'd always wanted, a simple life with someone who loved her, someone who understood where she came from. She glanced at James and saw him watching the exchange with an expression she couldn't read, but something in his gray eyes looked almost like resignation. "Danny," Emma said gently, "I need time to think." Danny smiled and pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. "Take all the time you need, love. I'll wait." As Emma laughed at something Danny whispered in her ear, James watched them together and felt something cold settle in his chest. This was Emma's real world, warm, genuine, uncomplicated. Danny could offer a life without scandal, without the constant pressure of living up to society's expectations. Maybe Frank Carter was right. Maybe James had been selfish, pulling Emma into his dark, complicated world when she deserved so much better. But as James prepared to leave, he caught Emma's eyes over Danny's shoulder, and the longing he saw there made him reconsider everything.
James left Emma's flat without another word. The image of her laughing with Danny burned into his mind. Frank Carter's warning echoed in his thoughts. Men like you don't marry girls like Emma. Maybe the old man was right. Maybe James had been selfish, pulling Emma into his complicated world when she deserved the simple happiness Danny could give her. 2 days passed in a blur of meetings and contracts. But James couldn't focus on anything except the way Emma had looked at him over Danny's shoulder, like she was drowning and he was her only lifeline. Emma, meanwhile, hadn't returned to work. Her desk sat empty, her computer dark, and James found himself staring at the space where she should be. On Wednesday afternoon, Emma was leaving the hospital after visiting her father for his weekly checkup when a sleek black car pulled up beside her on the pavement. The window rolled down, revealing Victoria Sterling's perfect smile. "Miss Carter," Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet. "I was hoping we could have a chat." Emma's stomach clenched. "I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, but I think you do." Victoria opened the car door. "Get in. There's something you need to see." Every instinct told Emma to walk away, but something in Victoria's tone suggested this wasn't a request. Emma reluctantly climbed into the back seat of the luxury car. Victoria pressed the button, raising the partition between them and the driver. "I'll be direct, Miss Carter. You're standing in the way of something very important." "James's happiness?" Emma asked bitterly. "Laugh. The sound like breaking crystal. James's future. Our future. You see, darling, what James needs isn't some romantic fantasy with a working-class girl. What he needs is stability, security, and the kind of partnership that can actually help his sister." Emma's hands clenched in her lap. "He doesn't love you." "Love? How quaint. Love doesn't pay for experimental treatments or private medical facilities. Love doesn't cure comas." The car pulled to a stop outside a small shop in Camden, her father's friend's bakery where Emma had worked part-time during university. But now there was a sold sign in the window. "Recognize this place?" Victoria asked, sweetly. Emma's blood turned cold. "What have you done?" "Sterling Properties has been very busy in your neighborhood, Miss Carter. This bakery, the corner shop where your father buys his newspaper, even the building where your brother's friend lives." She pulled out a tablet, showing Emma a map dotted with red pins. 18 properties in total, all purchased in the last month. Emma stared at the screen, horror growing in her chest. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I can, and I will." Victoria's smile was razor sharp. "Unless, of course, you accept my very generous offer." She handed Emma an envelope. Inside was a check for £100,000. "All you have to do is disappear from James's life. Take the money, move your family somewhere nice, start fresh. Your father could afford the best private treatment. Your brother could finish university without debt." Emma's hands shook as she held the check. £100,000. Enough to solve every problem her family had ever faced. "And if I don't?" Emma asked quietly. Victoria's expression hardened. "Then Sterling Properties will begin eviction proceedings on all 18 properties. Rents will increase by 300%. Small businesses will be forced to close. Families will lose their homes." She leaned closer. "Including your father's flat." Emma felt sick. "You'd destroy innocent people's lives just to get James back." "I'd do whatever it takes to protect what's mine." Victoria's mask of civility slipped completely. "James was mine first, Miss Carter. We have history, shared goals, a future planned together. You're just a temporary distraction." Emma looked out the window at the neighborhood where she'd grown up, where her father had lived his whole life. She thought about Mrs. Patterson next door, about the young couple with twin babies in the flat below, about all the families who would suffer because of Victoria's ruthless ambition. "This is exactly what James does, isn't it?" Emma said slowly. "This is how he built his empire, by threatening innocent people until they give him what he wants." Victoria's smile returned. "James taught me well. Business is about leverage, darling. Find what people care about most and threaten to take it away." Emma stared at the check in her hands, understanding flooding through her like ice water. This wasn't just about Victoria wanting James back. This was showing Emma exactly what kind of man she'd fallen in love with. James Blackwood was the kind of person who would destroy families for profit, the kind who would use fear and manipulation to get what he wanted. And now Victoria was using his own methods against her. "I need time to think," Emma said. 24 hours. After that, the evictions begin." Emma got out of the car on shaking legs, the check still clutched in her hand. She watched Victoria's car disappear into London traffic, then turned and ran toward Blackwood Industries. She found James in his office, standing at the windows overlooking the city. He turned when she burst through the door, his face lighting up with relief. "Emma, thank God. I was worried when you didn't come to work." "How many?" Emma interrupted, breathing hard from her run. "How many what?" James looked confused. "How many families have you destroyed? How many homes have you taken? How many businesses have you crushed? How many people have suffered so you could build this empire?" James's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "Victoria. She bought 18 properties in my neighborhood and threatened to evict everyone unless I disappear from your life." Emma's voice cracked with emotion. "She learned it from you, didn't she? This is what you do. This is who you are." James moved toward her, his hands raised peacefully. "Emma, let me explain." "What explain? That you're exactly like her? That you spent years terrorizing families just like mine?" Emma backed away from him. "How many children have lost their homes because of you, James? How many fathers have lost their shops? How many mothers have cried themselves to sleep because you decided their lives were less than your profit margins?" It's not that simple, James said desperately. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. For Sophie, Emma finished. Yes, I understand. You became a monster to save someone you love. She looked at him with new eyes, seeing clearly for the first time. But you're still a monster, James, and I can't love a monster. James stood frozen as Emma walked toward the door, the check crumpled in her fist. Emma, please, he called after her. Don't let Victoria win. Emma stopped, but didn't turn around. She's not winning, James. Both of you are losing. Because neither of you understand that love isn't something you can buy, sell, or threaten into existence. She walked out of his office, leaving James alone with the weight of what he'd become.
Emma spent the night staring at Victoria's check, her mind racing with possibilities. £100,000 could change her family's life forever, but accepting it would mean disappearing from James's world, leaving him to Victoria's manipulations. By morning, Emma had made her decision. She called the number on Victoria's business card. "I'll take your deal," Emma said when Victoria answered, "but I want to meet face-to-face to discuss the terms." "Smart girl," Victoria purred. "The Shard Restaurant, 1 o'clock. Come alone." Emma hung up and immediately called her brother Tom. "I need a favor," she said. "Do you still have that recording device from your journalism course?" An hour later, Tom met Emma at a coffee shop near King's College, carrying a small bag. "What's this about, Em? You sounded scared on the phone." "I can't explain everything, but I need to record a conversation." Emma took the tiny device Tom handed her. "How does it work?" "Press this button to start recording. It'll capture everything within a 10-foot radius." Tom's medical student instincts kicked in. "Emma, if you're in some kind of trouble—" "I'm handling it," Emma said, though her hands shook as she tested the device. "Just promise me you'll stay at university no matter what happens. Don't come home until I call you." Tom frowned but nodded. "Be careful, sis." At 1 o'clock, Emma arrived at the Shards restaurant, the recording device hidden in her jacket pocket. Victoria was already seated at a corner table with a view of the entire city, looking like she owned the world. "Miss Carter," Victoria smiled as Emma sat down, "I'm so pleased you've come to your senses." Emma forced herself to appear defeated. "I just want this to be over. My family doesn't deserve to suffer because of me." "Very wise." Victoria slid a contract across the table. "Sign this, and Sterling Properties will halt all eviction proceedings in your neighborhood." Emma pretended to read the contract while secretly activating the recording device. "This says I have to leave London entirely, move at least 200 miles away. We can't have you changing your mind and coming back, can we?" Victoria's smile was predatory. "And James needs to understand that you were never serious about him, just a gold digger who took the money and ran." "And if I refuse to sign?" Victoria leaned back in her chair, supremely confident. "Then tomorrow morning, 18 families receive eviction notices. The elderly couple in flat 2B of your father's building, gone. The family with twin babies downstairs, homeless. All because little Emma Carter thought she could play in the big leagues." Emma felt sick, but forced herself to continue. "How do you have the power to do all this?" "Money, darling, pure and simple. Sterling Properties has been buying up distressed assets in working-class neighborhoods for years. We purchase buildings with existing tenants, then raise rents until people can't afford to stay. It's perfectly legal and incredibly profitable." "That's monstrous," Emma whispered, genuine horror in her voice. "That's business," Victoria corrected. "James taught me that sentiment has no place in empire building. You destroy what stands in your way and take what you want." Emma's hand trembled as she picked up the pen. "And James? What happens to him?" "James will marry me within 6 months," Victoria said with absolute certainty. "He'll realize you were just a distraction and remember what's really important, securing Sophie's future." "Sophie," Emma repeated, hoping to get Victoria talking. "His precious sister, the albatross around his neck." Victoria's mask slipped, revealing genuine irritation. Do you know how exhausting it's been competing with a woman in a coma? Every decision James makes, every relationship he considers, it all comes back to Saint Sophie. Emma kept the pen poised over the contract. But the medical bills must be enormous. £15,000 a month for 5 years, nearly £1,000,000 so far. And for what? A body that breathes but doesn't live. But I've found a solution to that problem too. Emma's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Victoria's smile was ice cold. St. Catherine's private medical facility has agreed to take over Sophie's care. Lovely place, very, economical. Of course, they don't offer quite the same level of intensive treatment as her current facility, but James won't have a choice once I control the purse strings. You're going to let her die, Emma realized with horror. I'm going to let nature take its course, Victoria corrected. Without the expense of life support and experimental treatments, Sophie will simply fade away, and James will finally be free to move on with his life. Emma signed the contract with shaking hands, her heart breaking for James and his sister. When does the transfer happen? Already in motion, Victoria said triumphantly. Sophie was moved this morning. James doesn't know it yet, but he'll discover it soon enough. By then, you'll be long gone, and he'll understand that I'm the only one who can bring Sophie home. Emma stood on trembling legs. I need to pack. Of course, you have until midnight to be out of London. After that, the contract becomes void. Emma walked toward the restaurant exit, the recording device burning in her pocket. She had everything she needed to expose Victoria's schemes, but first, she had to get to James. Emma burst into Blackwood Industries 20 minutes later, rushing past security and taking the elevator straight to the top floor. She found James in his office, on the phone, his face white with panic. What do you mean she's been transferred? I didn't authorize any transfer. He looked up as Emma entered, his eyes wild with desperation. They've taken Sophie. Someone moved her to a different facility without my permission. James, I need to tell you something. Not now, Emma, James snapped, turning back to his phone call. I need to find my sister. It was Victoria. Emma pulled out the recording device. She moved Sophie. She's using her as leverage to force you to marry her. I have proof. James stared at the device in Emma's hand, his expression changing from panic to cold fury. You recorded our conversation. Yes, but you wore a wire to a private meeting. You set up a trap without telling me. Emma felt her heart sink. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? James laughed bitterly. By going behind my back? By not trusting me to handle Victoria myself? You said it yourself. You'd do anything for Sophie. I couldn't risk you making a deal with Victoria before we had evidence of her crimes. James's phone rang again. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. James, darling, Victoria's voice purred through the speaker, loud enough for Emma to hear. I imagine you've discovered Sophie's new accommodations by now. Where is she? Safe, for now, but St. Catherine's is rather, basic compared to Willowbrook. Sophie's life support is more fragile there. Equipment failures happen so easily. James watched his face crumble as he understood the threat. What do you want? You know what I want. Marriage, merger, and that little coffee girl out of our lives permanently. Miss Carter should be leaving London about now, actually. We came to a very satisfactory arrangement. James looked at Emma with betrayal burning in his gray eyes. You made a deal with her. James, let me explain. Choose, darling, your sister's life or your temporary infatuation with a girl who's already taken my money and run. Emma watched the man she loved stare at her with growing disgust and realization. In his eyes, she was just another person who'd betrayed him for money, another person who'd chosen profit over love. I choose Sophie, James said quietly into the phone. I'll marry you, Victoria. Just bring my sister home. Emma felt her heart shatter completely. Even with evidence of Victoria's crimes, even knowing the truth about the blackmail and manipulation, James was choosing his sister over their love.
And Emma finally understood that she'd never had a chance. Sophie would always come first. Family would always come first. Love would never be enough. James hung up the phone and looked at Emma with empty eyes. "Get out!" "James, please just listen to the recording." "Get out!" he roared, and Emma saw the full force of his pain and rage. "Take Victoria's money and leave. You got what you wanted." Emma left the recording device on his desk and walked toward the elevator, tears streaming down her face. As the doors closed, she saw James standing at his windows, looking more alone than any human being should ever look. She'd lost him. Even trying to save him, she'd lost him completely.
Emma didn't go home immediately after leaving James's office. Instead, she walked through London's streets for hours, the recording device heavy in her pocket like a stone. The weight of James's final words echoed in her mind. Take Victoria's money and leave. He thought she'd betrayed him for money. After everything they'd shared, everything she'd felt for him, he believed she was just another person trying to profit from his pain. By the time Emma reached her flat in Camden, it was past midnight. Photographers were camped outside her building, their camera flashes lighting up the dark street like lightning. Word of James's engagement to Victoria had already hit the news. "Emma! Emma Carter!" they shouted as she pushed through the crowd. "How does it feel to lose a billionaire to his ex-fiancée? Did you really take money to disappear? Any comment on the Blackwood-Sterling merger?" Emma kept her head down and ran up the stairs to her flat, ignoring their shouted questions. Inside, she found her father sitting in his armchair, looking older than she'd ever seen him. "Dad?" Emma closed the door behind her, shutting out the noise from the street. "Saw it on the news," Frank said quietly. "That Victoria woman, claiming you took £100,000 to leave London. That true, love?" Emma sank onto her sofa, exhaustion hitting her like a physical weight. "It's complicated, Dad. Did you take her money or not?" "I signed the contract," Emma admitted, "but I was trying to get evidence of her crimes. She's been buying up properties in our neighborhood, threatening families with eviction. I thought if I could record her admitting to blackmail." "But it backfired," Frank finished. Emma nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "James thinks I betrayed him. He chose his sister over me, and I don't blame him. I'd do the same thing." Frank moved to sit beside his daughter, pulling her into a hug. "Sometimes love isn't enough, sweetheart. Sometimes the world gets in the way." Meanwhile, 50 floors above London, James stood in his office, staring at the recording device Emma had left on his desk. He'd listened to the entire conversation 3 times, each playback making his chest tighten with a mixture of rage and regret. Victoria's voice, cold and calculating, admitting to buying up properties and threatening families. Her casual dismissal of Sophie's life. Her plan to let his sister die by transferring her to substandard care. Emma had risked everything to get this evidence. She'd walked into Victoria's trap knowing it could destroy her, all to protect him and his sister. And he'd thrown her out of his office like she was nothing. James's phone buzzed with a call from his lawyer. "Sir, we've reviewed the recording. Victoria Sterling can be charged with blackmail, conspiracy, and potentially attempted murder regarding your sister's care transfer." "Do it," James said coldly. "Press every charge possible." "What about the engagement announcement? The media's calling it the merger of the century." James looked out at London's lights, thinking about Emma walking through those streets alone, believing he'd chosen money and status over love. "Cancel it," he said. "All of it." Over the next week, both Emma and James threw themselves into work to distract from their pain. Emma returned to her old catering job, but the media attention made it impossible. Photographers followed her to every event, customers stared and whispered, and her supervisor finally asked her to take a leave of absence. "I'm sorry, Emma, but you're becoming a distraction until this media circus dies down." Emma nodded and packed up her uniform for the last time. She was effectively unemployed, unemployable, and heartbroken.
James, meanwhile, became even more ruthless in business than before. Without Emma's influence, without the humanity she'd awakened in him, he reverted to the cold businessman who saw people as assets and obstacles. "Acquire Morrison Industries," he told his board during a Monday morning meeting. "I don't care if it's a family business. I don't care about sentiment. I want their pharmaceutical patents, and I want them by Friday." His employees began avoiding him again, sensing the return of the man who terrified them before Emma's arrival. On Thursday morning, the story broke. "Billionaire's ex-fiancée charged with blackmail," screamed the headline across every major newspaper. The recording Emma had made was leaked to the press, and Victoria's voice filled radio shows and news broadcasts across London. Emma watched the coverage from her father's flat, feeling hollow despite Victoria's downfall. Justice felt empty when the person you loved thought you were the enemy. Her mobile rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, producers offering book deals, lawyers suggesting lawsuits against Victoria. Emma ignored them all. But the stress was taking its toll on her family. Frank had barely slept since the media attention began, and Emma noticed he was having trouble breathing. "Dad, maybe you should see a doctor," Emma suggested over breakfast. "I'm fine, love. Just tired of those bloody paparazzi camping outside." Emma looked out the window, where a few journalists still lingered, hoping for a statement or a photo. "This is all my fault. I brought this chaos into our lives." "You fell in love," Frank said gently. "That's not a crime." That afternoon, while Emma was at the grocery store trying to avoid the cameras, Frank collapsed in his armchair. Mrs. Patterson from next door heard the thud and called an ambulance. Emma's phone rang as she was walking home with shopping bags. "Emma, it's Mrs. Patterson. Your father's been taken to hospital. Heart attack, love. You need to come quickly." Emma dropped the groceries and ran, photographers chasing her through the streets as she flagged down a taxi. At the hospital, she found her father in intensive care, connected to machines that beeped and hummed around his bed. The stress of the past week triggered the attack. His heart was already weakened from years of industrial work. This media attention, the constant worry about your situation, it was too much. Emma sat beside her father's bed, holding his hand and feeling the weight of guilt crushing her chest. This was her fault, all of it. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have never gotten involved with James. I should have stayed in my own world." 2 hours later, James appeared in the hospital corridor. He'd heard about Emma's father's heart attack from his driver, who had heard it on the radio. James had dropped everything and raced across London, his heart pounding with fear. He found Emma in the family waiting area, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Emma," he said softly. She looked up, and for a moment, James saw relief flicker in her eyes. Then her expression hardened. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I heard about your father. I wanted to make sure that you hadn't killed him, because you nearly did. This whole mess, the media circus, the stress, it's because of you, because I was stupid enough to think someone like me could fit into your world. I know I hurt you, Emma. I know I said terrible things, but when I listened to that recording—" "Too late," Emma said, standing up. "You made your choice when it mattered. You chose to believe the worst about me instead of trusting what we had together." "I was protecting Sophie, and I was protecting you," Emma's voice cracked. "I risked everything to get evidence against Victoria, and you threw it back in my face." James reached for her, but Emma stepped away. "My father might die because I brought your world into his life. So please, just go. Leave us alone. We were better off before you came along." James stood in the hospital corridor as Emma walked back toward her father's room, her words echoing in his mind. He'd come here to apologize, to try to fix what he had broken between them. Instead, he'd discovered that some damage couldn't be repaired. Some choices couldn't be undone. Both of them were broken now, trapped on opposite sides of a chasm too wide to bridge. And neither of them knew How to take the first step towards forgiveness.
3 days passed after Emma told James to leave the hospital. Frank Carter was recovering well, his heart stable, and his spirits lifting as the media attention finally began to fade. Emma spent her days by his bedside, reading him newspapers and helping him with physiotherapy exercises. She tried not to think about James, tried not to wonder if he'd listened to the recording she'd left behind, tried not to care that Victoria Sterling had been arrested and charged with blackmail. It was Tuesday evening when Emma's world turned upside down again. She was helping her father eat dinner when the news came on the television in his hospital room. The reporter's solemn voice filled the quiet space. Breaking news tonight. Sophie Blackwood, sister of billionaire James Blackwood, has taken a dramatic turn for the worse. Sources at Willowbrook Medical Facility report that the 23-year-old, who has been in a coma for 5 years following a car accident, suffered complications this afternoon. Doctors say her condition is critical. Emma's fork clattered onto the food tray. The camera showed James's Bentley racing through London traffic, followed by news vans. "The family has been called to the hospital," the reporter continued. "Doctors are saying this could be Miss Blackwood's final hours." Emma stared at the screen, her heart breaking for James. Sophie was everything to him. His reason for building his empire, his motivation for every ruthless decision he'd made. Losing her would destroy him completely. "Go to him," Frank said quietly. Emma looked at her father in surprise. "Dad? That boy loves his sister the way you love your family. He's going to need someone tonight." Frank's eyes were kind but serious. "And you love him, even if you're too proud to admit it." "He chose Victoria over me," Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. "He chose his sister's life over his own happiness. That's what family does, love. We sacrifice for each other." Frank squeezed Emma's hand. "But tonight, he's going to lose the person he sacrificed everything for. He shouldn't face that alone." Emma looked at the television again, where the news was showing file footage of James and Sophie from years ago, before the accident, before the coma, when they were just a brother and sister who loved each other. "What if he doesn't want to see me?" Emma asked. "Then you'll know you tried. But Emma, some things are more important than pride. Love is one of them." 20 minutes later, Emma was in a taxi racing across London toward Willowbrook Medical Facility. The private hospital was surrounded by news vans and photographers, but Emma managed to slip through a side entrance she remembered from her visit weeks ago. The intensive care unit was on the 3rd floor. She found it easily, her heart pounding as she approached the family waiting area. She could see James through the glass doors of Sophie's room, sitting beside her sister's bed, holding her hand. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his tie askew. But it was his expression that broke Emma's heart, completely lost, like a little boy who didn't understand why the world was so cruel. Emma approached the nurse's station. "Excuse me, I'm here to see Sophie Blackwood. I'm family." The nurse looked skeptical, but something in Emma's expression must have convinced her. "Room 314, but please keep your voices down. Miss Blackwood's condition is very fragile." Emma knocked softly on the doorframe. James looked up, and when she saw him, his composed mask finally cracked completely. "Emma," he breathed, his voice breaking. "I heard on the news," Emma said softly, stepping into the room. "How is she?" James looked back at his sister, whose face was peaceful but pale against the white pillows. Machines surrounded her bed, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat. "The doctors say, they say her brain activity is declining. The swelling from the accident. It's finally—" James couldn't finish the sentence.
Emma moved to the other side of Sophie's bed, looking down at the young woman who'd been at the center of everything. She was beautiful, even like this, with James's dark hair and delicate features. "How long do you have?" Emma asked gently. "Hours, maybe less." James's voice was barely a whisper. 5 years, Emma. 5 years of fighting, of building an empire, of destroying myself to save her, and none of it mattered. Emma saw tears streaming down James's face, and her anger melted away completely. This wasn't the ruthless businessman who'd hurt her. This was a brother watching his sister die. "It mattered to her," Emma said softly. "Even if she couldn't show it, she knew you were fighting for her." James looked up at Emma through his tears. "I'm so sorry. For everything I said, everything I did. You were trying to help me, and I—" "Shh." Emma reached across Sophie's bed and touched James's hand. "We can talk about that later. Right now, you need to focus on Sophie." Emma settled into the chair beside Sophie's bed, making it clear she wasn't leaving. James stared at her in amazement. "Why are you here? After everything I put you through, why would you come?" Emma met her eyes across Sophie's still form. "Because you shouldn't face this alone. Because, despite everything that's happened between us, I still—" She paused, then continued quietly. "Because I love you, James, and love means showing up even when it hurts." James's breath caught, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Emma said with a small smile. "But that's not how love works." They sat in silence for a while, both holding Sophie's hands as the machines beeped steadily around them. Outside, London continued its relentless pace, but in this room, time seemed suspended. "Tell me about her," Emma said softly. "Before the accident, what was she like?" James's face lit up despite his pain. "Brilliant, funny. She wanted to be a teacher, said she was going to change the world one child at a time." He stroked Sophie's hand gently. "She used to make me practice her lesson plans on me. I'd pretend to be a difficult student, and she'd find ways to make learning fun." Emma smiled. "She sounds wonderful." "She was. She is." James's voice cracked again. "I can't let her go, Emma. She's all I have left." "She's not all you have," Emma said quietly. "You have people who care about you. You have a chance to build something meaningful with your life, something Sophie would be proud of." James looked at Emma, seeing clearly for the first time how much he'd thrown away in his grief and pride. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. Before Emma could answer, something extraordinary happened. Sophie's fingers, which had been still for 5 years, tightened around James's hand. Both James and Emma gasped, staring at Sophie's face. Her eyelids fluttered just for a moment, and her lips seemed to move slightly. "Sophie," James leaned closer. "Sophie, can you hear me?" The heart monitor showed a spike in activity. Sophie's breathing seemed to deepen slightly. James looked at Emma with wonder and hope blazing in his eyes. "Did you see that? She squeezed my hand. She actually squeezed my hand." Emma felt tears streaming down her own face as she watched the siblings, understanding that sometimes miracles happened when love was stronger than pride. And as Sophie's fingers moved again, Emma knew that their story wasn't ending. It was finally ready to begin.
Sophie's fingers squeezed James's hand again, stronger this time. The heart monitor beeped faster, and her breathing grew deeper. James held his breath, afraid that speaking might break whatever miracle was happening. "Sophie?" Emma whispered softly. "Can you hear us?" Sophie's eyelids fluttered more noticeably now. Her lips moved, and a small sound escaped, barely audible but unmistakably human. "Get the doctor," James said urgently, never taking his eyes off his sister's face. Emma pressed the call button, and within seconds, medical staff flooded the room. Dr. Patterson, Sophie's neurologist, pushed through to examine her while James and Emma stepped back to give him space. "Remarkable," Dr. Patterson murmured, checking Sophie's pupils with a small flashlight. "Her brain activity is increasing dramatically, blood pressure rising to normal levels." Sophie's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually finding James's face. Her lips moved again, and a small sound came out clearly. "James," she whispered. James collapsed into the chair beside her bed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm here, Sophie. I'm right here." "You look terrible," Sophie said with the faintest smile, her voice raspy from years of silence. James laughed through his tears, a sound of pure joy that filled the room. "You've been asleep for 5 years, and that's the first thing you say to me?" Sophie's eyes found Emma standing at the foot of the bed. "Who's the pretty girl?" Emma stepped forward, her own tears flowing freely. "I'm Emma. I'm a friend of your brother's." "More than a friend," James said, taking Emma's hand and pulling her closer. "Sophie, this is the woman I love, the woman who saved both our lives." Over the following weeks, Sophie's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. She had to relearn basic functions: walking, eating solid food, adjusting to how much the world had changed in 5 years. But her mind was sharp, her spirit intact, and her love for James unchanged. More importantly, Sophie's awakening changed James fundamentally. Sitting in that hospital room, watching Emma care for both him and his sister without expecting anything in return, James finally understood what true love meant. "I've been thinking," James said to Emma one evening, as they sat in Sophie's hospital room. Sophie was mapping, and the room was quiet, except for the gentle hum of monitors. "About what?" Emma asked, curious about his mysterious smile. "About everything. About what kind of man I became while Sophie was sick." James took Emma's hand. "I turned into a monster, Emma. I destroyed families, ruined lives, all in the name of saving her. But you know what I realized? Sophie would have been horrified by what I did. The sister I knew, the one who wanted to teach children and change the world, she never would have wanted me to hurt innocent people for her sake." Emma squeezed his hand. "You did what you thought you had to do." "But that's just it. I didn't have to. I chose to. I chose to become ruthless because it was easier than finding ethical ways to make money." James looked at his sleeping sister. "I'm going to change all that." And he did. Over the next 6 months, James transformed Blackwood Industries completely. He sold off the divisions that relied on aggressive takeovers. He established the Sophie Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to helping families afford medical care for critically ill children. He began investing in sustainable businesses that created jobs rather than destroying them. Emma's father made a full recovery, and though he never knew it, James quietly covered all his medical expenses and ongoing care. When Frank complained about the NHS surprisingly covering experimental treatments he'd never expected, Emma just smiled and said the healthcare system worked in mysterious ways. Emma and James grew closer during Sophie's rehabilitation. They had dinner together most evenings, took weekend walks along the Thames, and slowly rebuilt the trust that had been shattered by Victoria's manipulation. James was patient, understanding that Emma needed time to believe in their love again. Victoria Sterling, meanwhile, was sentenced to 2 years in prison for blackmail and conspiracy. Her business empire crumbled, and the properties she'd bought in Emma's neighborhood were sold to a housing association that kept rents affordable for working families. 6 months to the day after Sophie woke up, James asked Emma to meet him at the Savoy Hotel. "Why there?" Emma asked, curious about his mysterious smile. "You'll see," James said. "Just trust me." Emma arrived at the hotel wearing a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She found James in the grand ballroom where they'd first met, but this time he was alone except for a single violinist playing soft music in the corner. "James, what's this about?" Emma asked as he approached her. "I've been thinking about beginnings,
about how sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with accidents. Emma's eyes widened as she understood what he was planning. "James, you're not—" "Oops," James said with a grin, deliberately knocking the coffee cup over himself. The hot liquid splashed across his white shirt, just like that first night. Emma burst into laughter despite herself. "You're completely mad." "Completely in love," James corrected, pulling the coffee-stained napkin from the tray. But this time, Emma noticed something different about the napkin. There was writing on it, careful calligraphy in black ink. "Emma Carter," James read aloud, dropping to one knee in the middle of the ballroom. "Will you marry me?" Emma gasped as James opened the napkin fully, revealing a stunning diamond ring nestled in the coffee-stained fabric. "I wanted to ask you in the same place where we met, where you spilled coffee on the most arrogant man in London and somehow saw something worth saving," James said, his voice shaking with emotion. Emma looked down at the man who'd been a stranger 6 months ago, who'd terrified her and thrilled her and broken her heart before putting it back together stronger than before. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes?" James asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Yes," Emma said louder, throwing her arms around him as he stood up. "Yes, I'll marry you, you ridiculous, wonderful man." James slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her in the same ballroom where their story began, while the violinist played and London sparkled beyond the windows. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony in Emma's neighborhood church, with Sophie as maid of honor and Frank walking Emma down the aisle. The reception was held in her family's restaurant, which James had secretly bought and renovated as a wedding gift. As Emma and James danced to their first song as husband and wife, surrounded by their families and friends in the place where Emma's grandmother had built her dreams, Emma realized that some accidents were really destiny in disguise. "Any regrets?" James murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. Emma looked up at her husband, the former ruthless billionaire who now dedicated his life to helping others, who'd learned that love was worth more than all the money in the world. "Only one," Emma said with a smile. "What's that?" "I wish I'd spilled coffee on you sooner." James laughed and spun her around the dance floor, both of them knowing that their greatest adventure was just beginning.